Hey, everybody, and welcome to season 2 of the All About Everest podcast. And I'm your host, Pauline Reynolds Nuttall. On this podcast, you can get anything and everything about Mount Everest, including interviews, book recommendations, tips, updates, and a whole lot more. So welcome to the spring 2023 Everest climbing season. And here we go. Hey, everybody, and welcome to today's podcast episode, which is an interview with Alan Arnette. Anyone who's familiar with Mount Everest, especially the coverage in the climbing season and the Himalayas in general, knows who Alan is. He is fantastic at what he does. I've mentioned him multiple times before on the podcast. He's just very informative when it comes to everything that's going on in the Himalayas and Mount Everest. His coverage is greatly appreciated and also respected by so many in the mountaineering world because he really gets into the facts. He's honest and he doesn't sugarcoat anything. Excellent at fact checking and just an awesome human being. So many people really respect him, not only for the work that he does, but also for who he is. I only hear good things about him in the community. And again, he is a highly respected individual, not only as a mountaineer, but also as a human. I usually, get into a bunch of stuff before I get into the rest of the podcast, but the interview with Alan was fairly long, and I think we probably could have talked for much, much longer. He's just such an interesting person, and he's usually the one who's interviewing for his podcast. So it was really special to me. And not only that, Alan was on my bucket list of people to interview for the podcast. And so now I have 2 out of the 5 that I want to interview. Really quick before I get into the rest of the podcast episode, there's a new book coming out. I believe it's in April of next year. It's called Everest Inc., The Renegades and Rogues Who Built an Industry at the Top of the World by Will Cockrell. Again, it's supposed to come out in April, and it's about the industrialization of mountaineering. Alan is mentioned in the book, and he contributed a little bit. I have someone tentatively scheduled for next week who's also mentioned in the book. Hopefully, I can get an interview with him. He's got some stuff going on. But look for that book in April, and as soon as it comes out on pre-order, I will definitely let you guys know. And I did ask Will to jump on the podcast with me just before it comes out so that we can talk about this book, because the commercialization of mountaineering in general is very important when it comes to all of the things that have changed in the mountaineering world over the years. And depending on who you talk to, it has made the mountains better or it's made it worse. So I cannot wait for this book to come out. And I'm really happy that Will Cockrell wrote it. So look for that coming out in April of next year. Again, as soon as pre-order is available, I will let you guys know. The only other thing that I wanted to mention today is a review that I had on Apple Podcasts. I always encourage you guys to leave me reviews because I don't know if I'm doing something good or if I'm doing something wrong. Like last week, for whatever reason, the audio was absolute crap. Totally own it. However, the review that was left on Apple Podcasts, just to make it short, was that the first 2 episodes were absolutely informative, and I don't know what episodes they listened to. However, they had a hard time with the way that I pronounce mountain. So I pronounce mountain as mountain. I have a glottal stop, Glottal stop, Glottal stop. And basically, it's when you swallow certain consonants. It's a type of sound. And in my area in Montana, almost everybody pronounces mountain as mountain. I think it would be really weird if I tried to pronounce it correctly. I think if I said mountain, it would just come off as super funny. So I apologize for my regional dialect and the fact that most people on this side of Montana swallow their T's, and words like mountain, mitten, kitten, people just swallow that. Also, people who are from the Middle East and who speak Arabic, Hebrew, there are several sounds in those languages that are considered glottal stops. And you guys have to remember, my second language, which is almost my mother tongue, sometimes I speak it better than English, is Hebrew, which is one of those Middle Eastern languages. All right, you guys, on for the rest of the episode. I hope you enjoy it. I know it's really long. I chose not to split it because I felt it was just such a fantastic interview that it would just take away from it if I split it into 2 parts. Oh my gosh, you guys, I have a killer deal for you. As you guys know, I'm super outdoorsy and I camp over 45 nights a year, which isn't a lot, but it is because I have a family. And one of the ways that I find affordable gear and also discover new things as well is by subscribing to the Nomadic subscription box. It's a subscription box that comes once a month or quarterly, and it has outdoor gear in it. I have discovered some of the most amazing brands that I absolutely love, and things that I wouldn't even have tried, I've tried because of my subscription. It starts at $29 a month, and you don't have to get the subscription box. If there's something that you love, you can buy it right off of their website. The code to use to get 10% off is Everest, and their website is thenomadic.com. That's the nomadic with a K.com. And I'll have a link in this description of this podcast episode. Hey, everybody. And I want to welcome Alan Arnette to the All About Everest podcast. Alan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, great to be here. Thank you.
So the question that I wanted to start with, it's not a normal question that I ask all of the people that I interview. Tell me, who is Ida?
Well, okay, you start off with one that just reached in my heart and just pulled it out. Ida Arnette is my mother, was my mother. She passed away in 2009 from Alzheimer's disease. And I had a really special relationship with my mom. I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee. And, it was a Leave It to Beaver type of a, childhood for me with my brother Ken and my dad. So the four of us, we had this little nuclear family, and it was typical middle class. Back in the days when you had to get off the couch to go change the channel on the television, and my dad and my brother and I would be in the front yard with binoculars trying to see a satellite go over, and I would sit on the washing machine that was in our kitchen. That gives you an idea what kind of a house it was, and talk to my mom and ask her questions like, what's the stock market, and is cancer contagious, and why do the Baptist ministers always yell at you? And so we just had this wonderful relationship. So when my mother developed Alzheimer's, and the day that she asked me, who am I? She didn't recognize me. It changed my life forever. So I began to dedicate my climbing to honor a vow that I made to Ida while we were going through the journey of Alzheimer's with her together. And that vow was that I was not going to let her death from this terrible disease just let it be another number on a long list of people, that I was going to do everything I could to help the world remember Ida Arnette And I was going to use my mountain climbing as a way to raise much needed money for Alzheimer's research. And so that's what I really have been doing since really 2008.
And you bring Ida up almost every single article and every single podcast. And it's so inspiring that you can really hear the love that you had for your mom and how you dedicate everything to her. It's pretty amazing.
It's one of those things. Well, I appreciate that very much, Pauline. It's one of those things that I don't want to. I don't want to exploit the situation. I want to honor the situation. And there's so many people that are going through this right now with their families. And in many ways, it's not the individual who has the disease that suffers the most. It's the caregivers and it's the family around them. It can rip families apart. It can destroy finances. And the person who has it just kind of has this life of Zen that they're living in the moment. And it's not that they are not making new memories. I mean, it's not that their memories are going away. It's that they're not making new memories. So when I would ask my mom, what did you have for breakfast? And she says, I don't know. It was just that she never made that memory in her brain. The synapses never connected. And once you realize that it's a terminal disease, even though there's been a lot of progress made, and recently there was a new drug that was approved by Eli Lilly, which, it slows the disease by months, and it is not a cure by any stretch of the imagination. So it's still accurate to say we don't have a way to cure it, prevent it, slow it down significantly. And once you get it, it's 100% fatal. And so I want everybody to know that this is one of those diseases that can really impact anybody. It impacts minorities and women disproportionately, but it doesn't matter if you're rich, poor, you live in Africa or you live in Iceland, you can get it.
It is probably one of the worst diseases, and you're right, it does impact everyone around them, not just the individual who has that. And that's something that a lot of people forget. My next question is, what got you into mountaineering? You live in Colorado.
Yeah, I do, but I was born and raised in Memphis, Tennessee. And I have to once again go back to my parents. And every Father's Day, we would load up the 1963 Chevrolet Impala. So that gives you an idea of how old I am. And we would take vacations. So typically from Memphis, we would go down to the Florida coast. But one year we came to Colorado and went to Estes Park. And we were having lunch at a dude ranch and eating barbecue and all that, the sauces all over our face and eating the baked beans. And off in the distance, maybe 10 miles as a crow flies, I could see Long's Peak, 14,259 feet, Long's Peak. And I let my eye trace the skyline where the summit ridge met the sky. And I just looked at that and I went, oh my gosh, wouldn't it be great to climb that one day? And I think that's where the seed for mountaineering was planted for me. And sure enough, I can look out my window and see Long's Peak right now from where I live in Colorado. And I've gone on to climb on it over 200 times, and I've summited it about 50 times. And I've used it as my primary training peak for all the other Himalayan and other climbs around the world, because it offers all sorts of different routes, from very, very technical to semi-walk ups. But I've done it in every year, month of the year, and every type of condition, and mostly by myself, because no one else is crazy enough to try to go climb it in the heavy winds and heavy snow of December and January. But yeah, so that's how the seed was planted. And then you fast forward, I got an electrical engineering degree from the University of Memphis. I went to work for Hewlett Packard for 30 years. I was a card-carrying workaholic. And so from age, 23 to 38, I worked like crazy. I never practiced engineering. I was mostly in general management. And so I did a few 14ers here in Colorado because I eventually landed here in Fort Collins. And then I ended up having a job with HP over in Europe. So I lived in Amsterdam for a couple of years, and Geneva, Switzerland for several years. And out my window there, I could see Mont Blanc. And so I hired a French guide, I didn't speak a lick of French, and he didn't speak a lick of English, but we somehow got along, and I summited, and I absolutely fell in love with the sport. And then the next year, I did a trek to Everest Base Camp, and as they say, the rest is history. So I've now done about 38 major expeditions since then. And I got to tell you, when I first started, I was not very good. I very rarely summited any of these mountains. And I mean, I made every mistake in the book, from wearing, jeans to, too much cotton to, ignoring weather forecasts. And, it's a miracle I'm here today. But, I just, something about the mountains, being in the mountains, that challenge in nature, and just, whether it was the cold wind against my cheek or hearing the crampons crushing into the snow, just everything put together. I always came home a slightly different, hopefully better version of myself, because of the suffering that I would go through on the mountain. I would have to really be focused on why I'm doing what I'm doing. And that really came to bear on all of my Everest experiences.
And you've had quite a few Everest experiences. It took you a couple of times to reach the summit. What caused you to first go for it? And why didn't you make it that first expedition?
So, yeah, I'll try not to be too long-winded on this. So I actually made the summit on my fourth attempt in 2011 as part of climbing the 7 summits. And I was doing that year to raise money for Alzheimer's. I called it 7 Summits for Alzheimer's, and to honor Ida Arnette. So you see, there's a reoccurring theme in all these things. But my first attempt on Everest, so like I said, I went to Everest Base Camp in 1997, saw Everest and the Himalaya mountains, and the little kids and the trail, and the tea houses, and everything that went along with it. It just fell in love with Nepal, and it became my second home. And just the Sherpa people, just everybody, the monasteries, the whole bit. So I then decided I was going to go climb a couple other mountains. I went to Choi OU, which is another 8,000-meter mountain in Tibet. Got to 8,000 meters on it, just a smidge underneath the summit. And then I climbed a mountain called Ama de Blam, which is this really beautiful pointy peak about 30 miles south of Everest. And it was on the summit of Ama de Blam, about 22,000 feet, that my New Zealand guide, David Hiddleston, said, "Well, mate, I guess you're ready for Everest now." And I was like, "What?" And that was the first time I ever really considered it. And so I did Denali that next summer, didn't make it because of weather. And then I went in 2002, and I didn't make it. And I went back in 2003, and I didn't make it. And I went back in 2008, and I didn't make it. So it's really easy when you don't make a mountain, you don't summit a mountain like Everest, to blame a lot of other people for it. But I'm going to take ownership of my, what I call, non-summits. And I suffered, or I executed the greatest sin that a mountaineer can make. And that's the sin of arrogance. I underestimated how hard it was going to be, and I overestimated my physical condition. And so all 3 times, in 2, 3, and 8, I got to just underneath the balcony at about 27,500 feet. And I turned myself around all 3 times, because I knew I could go higher, but I didn't know if I could go lower. And it wasn't worth risking my life, losing my life. I was going to come back home to my kiddies and my family, and maybe live to try another day. So what basically happened the first time was that I just ran out of energy, ran out of gas. The second time, my body didn't acclimatize. And the third time, I was just going too slow. So I just changed everything about how I approached climbing the mountain. But I came home after the 2008 experience devastated. And my mom, she was in the last 2 years of her life. And I remember sitting down with her and trying to explain climbing Everest. And she would go, "Oh, that's great. So where are we going for lunch?" And, so there was just this real disconnect. But her, still, I could tell she was proud of me, and she would kind of laugh at me. And we always connected with a great sense of humor. And I thought, if Ida could be handling this horrific situation at the end of her life with such grace and dignity and humor, I'm not going to give up. I'm not going to give up. So I decided to go back, and it was part of the 7 summits for Alzheimer's, where I summited all 8 of the 7 summits, with the exception of Denali, which once again I got weathered off in 1 year, from December 2010 to September 2011.
Mm-hmm.
And that climb on Everest, I'll tell you, I got to the same point where I turned around in 3 hours instead of the 6 hours. And I climbed with a Sherpa named Kami Sherpa, who became just my guardian angel in the mountains. I still keep in touch with he and his family over in Nepal. Love him like a father, son, brother, uncle, I don't know, love him to death. And when we summited, it was a moment.
That's so amazing. I've talked to some other mountaineers, including Cami Rita Sherpa and Adrian Bollinger, and we've talked about even if you don't make it to the very top, it's still a success. But in that moment, it's sometimes hard to realize that.
Yeah, I would, over the years, I've learned a number of things about this that were through mountain climbing. That number one, there's no such thing as a failure. That in my mind, a failure is when you try something really hard, you don't make it, and you don't learn from it. Not learning is the failure. It's not achieving the objective. And it could be, learning French. It could be having the best lawn in the neighborhood. It could be seeing your kid graduate from high school. It doesn't matter what it is. But if you don't learn from your effort, then you're likely to repeat the same mistakes over and over again. And that's kind of what I did on Everest in 2002 and 2003. I went back, I pretty much made the same mistakes 2 years in a row. And that's why the 2008 experience was just devastating. So yeah, I agree with Adrian and everybody else that that it's mountains have a way of stripping away the veneer that we have, the pretense that we have. They have a way of exposing exactly who you are, if to no one else but to yourself. And that learning is just incalculable, the difference that it can make in your life if you're open to it. And I'm the first one to admit that after I didn't summit, especially the first time, I came home kind of pointing fingers and blaming everybody. And after about a month, I went, "Come on, Alan, own it. You went there, you weren't prepared, you underestimated, and it is a hard experience." The people that talk about escalators and Starbucks and being short roped by a Sherpa and paying $65,000 to be drugged to the top, they have not attempted to climb Mount Everest. And I would invite them to go climb it, and then I'd love to have a conversation with them about their experience.
One of the things that we all know you for is you've taken your experience of mountaineering and climbing Mount Everest, and you're kind of the go-to person that everyone reads and listens to during the Everest season because of your input and your insight to everything that happens on the mountain, anywhere from the teams that are there, the conditions. I was just talking to someone on Saturday, and he was telling me, he's like, Alan says that this is going on K2. I'm so glad that this year I decided not to go. And I'm so grateful, and I know that other people are too, that you take this experience and you help so many of the people that are climbing. Why did you decide to start covering Mount Everest on your blog and with your podcast?
Well, I appreciate that comment very much. That's very meaningful to me, because I do this primarily in my journey around Alzheimer's. But also, it's interesting. I started the website, alanarnette.com, back in 1999. And, before most of my followers were even born. And so I started off as a family website, but I quickly learned the dark side of the internet when people were stealing pictures of my family and using them for nefarious endeavors. So I switched it over to simply chronicling my own climbs. And I started to talk about my climbs just with what I considered to be authenticity, that I didn't try to be anything that I wasn't. I mean, if I got there and I did it, if I went to a mountain and I didn't make it and I threw up, or I, peed in my pants or whatever it was, I was more than happy to talk about that. And what did I learn from that experience? And I think that authenticity and that transparency and that candidness began to develop a reputation for me of being someone that people could trust, that they knew that I wasn't going to spin, that I'm not a PR, I'm not a mouthpiece for somebody else. And I began to take that moniker on very seriously. And so I went to Everest and I live blogged it, and I did it again in 2 and 3, and then 4. I was, April and May came along, and oh, my heart was just aching. I wanted to be back in the mountains. I wanted to be back in Nepal, but that wasn't going to happen. So I decided, well, I'm going to blog about the season. So this is in 2004. So I started looking at all the websites, and in 2004, 20 years ago, roughly, there were many, many blogs, not social media like Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, et cetera. So I was able to read those, and people were just doing a magnificent job of documenting it and sharing their innermost thoughts. And so I began to basically mine all of that information and then aggregate it. And I could tease out what I was seeing were the major themes of the season. And that's what I started to write about. And I loved finding an individual whose story was similar to mine, just a regular person. You're not a paid athlete. Hopefully you have a degree of humility, which, is going to help you to be able to climb the mountain and learn something from it. And I would have the blog of the day. That was always the big thing I would do. And these days I can't do it because it's just the communication has just totally changed. So I did it in 2004 and at 5 and 6, and it just continued to grow and expand. And my followers, now I've got about 3 million people that follow the blog every year, and tons on social media and stuff. But one of the big things I wanted to do was to also talk about not only the good side of it. I didn't want to be Pollyannish. I wanted to be accurate, and I wanted to be real. And there are real problems in mountaineering, whether it's in Antarctica, Alaska, Pakistan, Nepal. There are problems in this sport. And if we don't talk about these problems openly, and not only talk about the problems, but also offer up alternatives and solutions, then we're going to continue to destroy the very sport that most of us love.
I definitely agree with that. And you're very open and honest because you're not with some company about what the real problems are. Like this year, for example, it was 17 people died on Mount Everest this year. And a lot of people told me off the record why they thought these deaths occurred, but no one would go on the record because they didn't want to hurt the climbing company that they had climbed with. And you, on the other hand, you're just open and you're telling the world, hey, this is what I'm hearing. This is what I think. You don't, and you're so honest about it. And everybody appreciates that about you. And since I already brought it up, why do you think there were so many deaths this year?
Well, one of the things that just, if I can just say it very bluntly, irritated me to no end was that the Minister of Tourism in Nepal said it was all due to climate change, that it was one of the coldest years ever, and that's what killed 17 people. And I respectfully disagree with that. Yes, it was one of the coldest years on Everest, and all the way from meteorologists like Chris Tomer and Michael Fagan and Mark DeKeeser all validated that. And then people that were there, like Guy Cotter, said that for the first time in 30 years, he had some of his Sherpas got actually frostnipped. So full stop, it was cold. But you know what? It's been cold before, and you haven't had 17 people die. It was the most number of people, Everest climbers, who have ever died in one season. There's been more people that have died, for example, during the earthquake, but some of those were journalists and other people at base camp. Some of them they were climbing other mountains in the area. So this is truly the deadliest year, 17 people. And if you break it down, 3 Sherpas died in the icefall when the upper part collapsed. That was not, maybe you could call that climate change, I don't know, but there's no definitive proof of that because the icefall has collapsed before. Had one Sherpa died at Camp 2 during a fall at the helipad, which I don't really understand that. Another died on the yellow band that was with the cleanup crew, a Sherpa. So that's 5 Sherpas who died. Then you had 3 people that were over 50 who died, one at Camp 2 and 2 elsewhere. And that was probably altitude related. That had nothing to do with climate change. And sadly, that's part of the deal. Every year, historically, 4 to 6, more often 8 people will die every season on Everest, typically due to altitude related illnesses. And that is just a fact of the, of the bargain that you strike when you go try to climb an 8,000 meter mountain. So that leaves us with roughly 9 people that also died. Those 9 people, they were all with economy operators, people that were charging $25,000, $30,000, $35,000. Often they were understaffed. Often they were running out of supplemental oxygen. Thus, we saw thefts of oxygen this year. And we had people that were abandoned. And for the life of me, how in the world do you pay anybody tens of thousands of dollars with the deal that they're supposed to be there with you to guide you up and down the mountain, and then they leave you alone? The horror stories that I heard, like for example, there was one of my Summit Coach clients. He was on a team. It was a Nepali operated team. One of his teammates, a young French lady, broke her leg at the yellow band. Her Sherpa left her there. He saw it. He witnessed it. He heard on the radio her calling for help. And she was left alone. Now, luckily, it was a non-weight bearing bone that she broke, and she was able to get back down to Camp 3 safely, but that's inexcusable. And so, but everybody turns their head. And you're right, people will not talk about it. They won't name the operators that claim 100% success and how great they are. And here, read my book and watch my movie, and and come, and you have no experience needed. You can come climb with us. We'll teach you everything you need to know. And that is seducing naive people to go to Mount Everest, and today now mountains like K2, and it's creating an environment which is absolutely a buyer beware environment. But you're not just risking buying a bad pair of shoes, you're risking your life. And I'm not a big guy for regulations, but I think there ought to be some type of entry level vetting of clients, that you have to have experience. The people that you're paying have to be qualified to be a guide. They've got to have some basics like, basic first aid training, basic cultural interaction training, language skills, mountaineering skills. It's very hard to turn somebody around up on a mountain that's paid $70,000, but that's what you're paying people to do. You're paying them to get you back down alive. And there's a whole 2 different attitudes of guiding right now. One attitude, mostly pervaded by the Western companies, are that my job is to give you a chance to get to the summit and get you back down safely. My number one priority is your safety. The lower cost operators, and primarily these are the local operators. And by the way, this is not unique to Nepal. It's happening in Argentina. It's happening in Russia on Elbrus. It's happening all around the world. These people think that their role is just to simply get you to the mountain, and then it's up to you. And if you don't have the experience to be self-sufficient, chances are you're going to make a bad decision, and it's going to take your life. So who's to blame here? I think there's a lot of, it goes around. It's up to the individual to show personal responsibility. It's up to the person that you pay to show professional responsibility. And, it's up to the local governments to enact an environment that is somewhat safe and orderly.
Yeah, talking to a lot of the people this year, the consensus is it really comes down to the operators and their responsibility of taking care of these climbers, which, and you said it, a lot of people were abandoned. The other 2 things that I heard a lot this year were that people were not acclimatizing properly and the operators were disregarding it. And I also heard from multiple people that people were sick with COVID. And again, the operators kind of ignored it and was like, let's just keep going. And those were 2 major things that I heard as well.
Yeah, I heard the COVID, and I'm not sure I buy that, because COVID and the Kumbu cough have very similar symptoms of upper respiratory distress. And, I've had the Kumbu cough before where I felt like I was going to break a rib. I've also had COVID. And those were two different feelings, but completely. And so, and with the strains of COVID that are out now, they're very different than they were 2 or 3 years ago. Now, it could have been COVID. I don't know. I'm not a doctor, but um, but I think that the acclimatization is a real issue. That there were people that were, being rushed up and down the mountain. That a weather window would appear when the summit winds would be under 30 miles an hour, and they would say, "Okay, we're going tomorrow." And it's like, "Well, don't we have one more rotation?" "Yeah, but we've got the window now, so let's go." And if you look at the people that were on the first waves versus the last waves, there's really a demarcation line. Some of the most seasoned operators, they've been climbing up there for literally decades. People like an Adventure Consultants and the Madison Mountaineering and International Mountain Guides, Alpine Ascents. They were the last people to go up this year. Some of the other companies like Seven Summits Trek and Elite and 8K and all of these other companies, they were the ones that jumped the gun and went very, very early. And they ran into some pretty horrendous conditions. And a lot of people, more people than normal, got frostbite this year. There were more rescues this year. But again, the general public won't hear about that. You will not read that on a lot of these social media sites. They'll talk about 100% success and look how great we were, and we're so proud to come with us next year, or come with us to go to Manaslu in the autumn. And so they just ignore the bad things that happen. And I'm hoping that they learn from it and they're improving their operations. And to be 100% fair, a lot of the operators that were really poor 6, 7, 8 years ago are doing really well now. Like, Seven Summits Trek, even though they have a fairly high death rate, they also are guiding 100 people. So statistically, their death rate has actually gone down over time because they've improved their operations. And I give them, full credit for that. They're learning and they're adapting and they're maturing their business processes and their safety processes. So I applaud them and I encourage them to continue. And the other new operators that are into the game, it's not about money, it's about lives.
And I think that is kind of the consensus, is that what should matter is the human beings and their lives, not necessarily the success rate or the money that these companies are making. My understanding was that this year, the amount of injuries and the amount of rescues, it doubled from previous years. It had never been that bad. Some of it did have to do with the very cold weather and being caught, at higher altitudes with no oxygen, partly because they were unprepared, partly because of the thefts. But it was just crazy. And the physicians were like, we weren't even prepared for the amount of injuries.
The other thing that factored into this year was an unprecedented use of helicopters to be able, and this started last year with this peak bagging collection game of going, flying from 8,000er to 8,000er. So you go to Annapurna, then you fly to, the Makalu, you fly to Kingachunga, and and so you're flying from peak to peak. So you can basically arrive and don't do any rotations, but wait till the Sherpas have established the high camps and they've put the fixed ropes in, they've kicked in the boot path, and then literally you do just follow the Sherpas up a boot path. I'm not saying it's easy, but I'm saying it's not comparable to what was done back in the the 60s, 70s, and 90s. And I desperately do not want to be the old man sitting on my front porch yelling, "Get off my lawn. Back in my day, we did it this way." I don't want to do that. But I am saying very clearly that a lot of the climbing we're seeing today, especially those in pursuit of records, is not comparable to what the previous records were that they're claiming that they want to break. It's apples and oranges, mainly through the use of technology, primarily through the use of excessive oxygen, using Sherpas to overpower the mountain, and then helicopters to reduce the amount of exertion that you do trekking from mountains to mountains. And in 2023, Guy Cotter told me that he thought there were close to 200 sorties coming out of Camp 2 back down to base camp or down to Lukla. And he said at times they would bring in a climber and drop them off at Camp 2 so they would bypass the ice fall. That's not right. That's not climbing the mountain. They cheat. Full stop. You don't start climbing Mount Everest from Camp 2. You start it from base camp. But they're going to come home and they're going to claim they summited. They're going to show their summit picture, or they're going to buy everybody drinks at the bar, or buy drinks for them, and they're going to be a hero or heroine, and so off you go. Times have changed.
I do on Spotify, I do these polls every week. And one of the polls, it was after I talked to Adrian Bollinger, and the poll was, do you think circumventing the ice fall is cheating or not? And it was 50-50. Some people were like, yes, it's cheating. You need to do it for base camp. You need to do it right. And the other half were like, no, it's okay to circumvent it because of safety reasons. So I find that very interesting that that's kind of where you're.
My attitude is that you need to, if you're going to climb on the Nepal side, which is why Adrian does not climb on the Nepal side, that you need to go from base camp, and that means going through the ice fall or going up on the flanks of Nuptse. There are ways you can avoid it if you're a good enough climber. You don't have to go through the ice fall, but that's part of the game. It's like saying, well, I don't want to go climb it because it's too cold. It's mountain climbing. Well, I don't want to climb it because I have to use my hands on the rocks. It's called mountain climbing. You're climbing a mountain, and with it, you accept the inherent dangers, the objective dangers that a serac may release off the west shoulder of Everest and come down and kill you. That is the bargain. You don't go to these mountains. Now, do you be stupid and you put yourself in, after heavy snowfall, you up and climb when it's avalanche prone? No, that's using good judgment and experience. But to say, well, I don't want to go across the Western Cone because there's too many crevasses. Well, don't go to climb Mount Everest. Go someplace else. It's called mountain climbing.
And I absolutely agree with that. It makes sense when you explain it that way. I'm one of those that I truly believe if you're going to do it from the Nepali side, you're going to do it, from base camp all the way to the top. If you want the safety measures, then do the northern side through Tibet.
And by the way, if you're also going to do it, then climb all the way back down through the ice fall.
Oh, yeah. Don't
take a helicopter from Camp 2, or don't get long line from Camp 3. If you do that, in my book, you did not summit. And it used to be Elizabeth Hawley. It was really just the gold standard for that. And Billy Berling and team has picked that up. But recently, they actually have not been interviewing climbers for the last several years. It came out earlier this year, like it's brand new news, but they haven't been interviewing people because it's been overwhelming in the last few years. There's just too many people up there. And also, sadly, there's too much spin going on. And that's one of the challenges that I have in my blog is that I have to check and triple check every single thing that I get to make sure that it's accurate, because there are people that are just flat out lying for their own self-aggrandizement or their self-promotion or to get the book deal or whatever it is afterwards. They're simply lying about their experience. And the public just simply doesn't know the difference. It's somewhat pervasive in our society these days.
I can see, I understand that there was last year, and I'm not going to get into too many details because it wouldn't be fair to this climbing company, but there were some climbers that used different passports to get their permits because of the country they were from. And the operator that they went with absolutely denied that these people were climbing with them. And it's like, where's the honesty here? Where's the transparency? And, if you're not transparent about this, then what else are you hiding? And they're also, this operators also uses helicopters in different ways and circumventing and all of that. So I absolutely understand that.
And what's sad about all of this that we're talking about is that mountaineering is a fantastic sport. It challenges you on every level of human existence, from your mental toughness to your physical toughness to your stamina to your integrity. It's a beautiful sport that puts you in these really remote places where very few people see it. I remember going through the ice fall the first time and just thinking, oh my gosh, look what nature has sculpted here. Look at these beautiful ice sculptures. surrounded by, Nuptse on my right, the west shoulder on my left, going through the Western Coon. I was there when the avalanche hit, or the earthquake hit in 2015. And even in that moment of desperation, there was a beauty and a grandeur to the scale, even if avalanches are coming off the mountain. And so, it's just this beautiful, pristine environment. Whether it's in Antarctica is another just an awesome place to go. Denali, the whole range around Denali is just stunning, and it's a real gift to be able to go and personally be there and to see it with your own eyes and to create those memories which will last for a lifetime. And that's one of the reasons that, when I talk about one of my taglines, memories are everything as it relates to Alzheimer's, is that it makes me sad to think that one day I might get Alzheimer's. My mother died from it and 4 of her sisters did. So 5 in my bloodline have died from the disease. And it saddens me that one day I might not remember what it looked like from the summit of K2 or summit of Everest, or being at the 14K camp on Denali, and because those memories are just so precious to me. And so when I think one of the reasons I get all wound up when we start talking about some of these problems and some of the lack of integrity by operators and climbers, that it's an insult to the sport. It doesn't honor a sport which deserves to be honored.
I totally agree with that. It is a sport. That's what people don't understand. It is a sport. It's something that takes time. And when people, and I've discussed this before during some of my interviews, when people are not doing it properly and taking the time and taking those steps, climbing other mountains beforehand, climbing other 8,000 meter peaks before Mount Everest, they're taking away from the sport. And it seems a lot of that is happening with the, as you call it, like the peak bagging, 2 or 3 in like a couple of days. And also like with the records, which some of those records are fantastic. They're legitimate.
Yeah, you bet.
But I think that, and I don't know if you would agree or not. Do you think that trying to get those records and those achievements are kind of making people reckless?
As far as, so more broadly, and I'll try to address the reckless side of it, but more broadly, mountaineering is not a sport like the Olympics. There really are no rules. There's no committee. There's nobody holding up you got 9.4 from the Chinese judge and 9.3 from the American judge. There's none of that. And basically you can come home and you can claim whatever you want to, and there's nobody that's really going to call you out on it. That's changed here in the last, with the advent of social media and the amount of material data that we have. We can now call out the fraud when people say they summited and they didn't, because their summit picture clearly shows that they're halfway down the mountain, not on the summit. But in general, it's not a sport that has rules, and so as a result, the records become a personal quest in my mind. So Kristen Harlow from Norway, I did a podcast with her, delightful person. And she wanted to get all 14 last year and couldn't do it because of the permit situation. Now she's coming back. Looks like she just got G2, so she got 11 of the 14, and now she's got G1, Broad Peak, and K2 left. And she's probably going to do it in the next 2 weeks. And she'll get all 14 in 3 months, and she would have done 26 8,000 meter mountains in roughly a year. I don't care who you are. That is amazing. That is stunning. Yes, she used helicopters to fly from camp to camp. Yes, she used sometimes 4 or 5 Sherpas to be with her. But at the end of the day, Kristen was taking each step under her own power, and she was climbing those mountains. She used supplemental oxygen. You bet she did. And all of that notwithstanding, it is still a phenomenal mental and physical feat. Now, is it comparable to what people like Gerlinda did and climbing the north face of K2? No, she's the first woman to get all 14 8,000 meter mountains not using supplemental oxygen, and she did it over many years, and she didn't use helicopters. So it's apples and oranges. But I am as happy for Kristen as I am for Gerlinda. That for each one of them is a unique and personal achievement. And I, for one, don't really care about records. I care about personal achievement and your integrity and how you handle yourself with the success that comes with the notoriety that you get. And I think that you can use that notoriety in a good way, or you can use it in a very selfish way. And I would prefer the good, positive way of contributing to society as opposed to doing it to line your pockets. Is it
Yeah, and
reckless? No, I don't. It's reckless only if you put other people's lives in danger. And in the way that Kristen has been doing about it, I don't. From what I can tell, maybe it's happened. I have, certainly none of us are there with her, but from what I tell, she is highly respecting of her Sherpa team, albeit with the conflict with the guys that were with last year. That one of them did climb one peak with her this year, and so there's a lot of complex dynamics going on with politics and governments and cultures. And who am I to say that she's doing something wrong? I'm not going to jump on that.
that's fair. One of the things that you bring up a lot and is brought up constantly is all of the trash and waste that's on Mount Everest.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. It's sadly, it's not as bad as people think. It's certainly not as bad as the mainstream press, like the BBC or CNN would do. I can go here in my hometown and I can go over to the dump. I can take a picture of the dump and I can say, look at this. This is the trash in Fort Collins, Colorado. Is it representative of the entire city? No, it's the town dump. So if I go take a picture of a pile of garbage outside Gorick Shep and I say, look at the Khumbu, it's covered, it's misrepresenting it. But you know what? It'll get clicks. It'll be bait clicks. Now, are there problems up higher on the mountain, especially at the South Col? You bet there is. And I have personally seen that because it is such a harsh environment with cold temperatures, low humidity, heavy winds, that human feces does not degrade. So, and it freezes into the ground, and it's just disgusting. And so, why operators aren't using so-called WAG bags, and the best operators are, like Alpine Ascents requires everybody, mountain climbing the 7 summits, Mike Hamill's, they all poop in plastic bags and carry their own poop down. Other companies don't do that. And so they just say, go over to this rock and do it. And that's inexcusable. And that comes back full circle to the operators having standards and taking care of the mountains that are providing them an income. So the trash, like tents being shredded, this is another one that the best operators will haul their tents back down. The worst ones will literally cut their logo off of the tent and leave the tent there. And within weeks, the high winds will shred them. And sometimes it'll blow somewhere away. There is no away, but it'll often get been frozen back into the ground, and that becomes virtually impossible to remove. I remember on K2, on Camp 2, I was shocked at all the tents that were shredded and frozen into the ground. And I remember trying to take one piece of a tent and pull it. It was frozen in the ground. I would have had to take a blowtorch and an ice axe to get that thing out. So the longer you leave it, the worse it is to get it out. So the right answer is don't leave it there in the first place. And it comes full circle to the operators. I'm sorry. And an individual climber can choose to poop on the ground or poop in a bag, and that's up to you to show personal responsibility. But it's up to the operators to have standards and to set expectations that if you're on my expedition, this is how you behave relative to leaving no trace ethics.
Which is extremely important. And it seems like this is an ongoing problem on all of the mountains, just not on Mount Everest, but it's highlighted there.
In I remember the first time I went to Aconcagua, it was horrible. Above Camp 1, you went over a little rise from where the tents were, and it was just hideous. And so Argentina began to take seriously their custodianship of having that mountain and their borders, and they have patrols now They have outhouses that are at base camp that are regularly picked up by helicopters. The solid waste out of the blue barrels, they haul it away, and and their permits are like $800, not $11,000. There's no excuse for Nepal to have their side of Mount Everest trashed the way that it is. China is even doing a better job. And during the COVID down years, they sent many people up there to remove trash. You'll occasionally see some operator that'll talk about how they're going to go clean up the mountain, and they bring down an impressive amount of trash. But the point is, don't have it happen in the first place. And I hope that they're doing a parallel operation. Not only are they cleaning, but they're also not adding. But it's not a hard problem to solve. There are many things that can be done on all of these mountains around the world, such as using wag bags and not leaving propane tanks left around, not leaving your tents to shred, removing old ropes as appropriate. That's a really thorny one, because if you're the last person on the mountain, you're coming down, they remove the ropes. I mean, that's kind of bad. But the people coming up the next year fixing the new ropes, that should be part of the deal, that they remove the old ropes and they fix the new ropes. Is it harder? Is it more expensive? Does it take more people, take more time? Yes. So if you got to increase the permit fee by 20% to remove the ropes and the trash, do it.
Well, and I think with removing the old ropes, it's also a safety thing too, because those ropes, they get brittle, they wear, and it takes the wrong move and clipping into the wrong rope, and you're halfway down the mountain. So
I remember on K2, I came up to an anchor station, and it was a spider. I've got this beautiful picture, it's a horrible picture, of the spider web of these white and yellow ropes coming into the anchor, and they all come in and they all go back out. And I come up to it, I'm looking at it, I go, which one's the new rope? I have no idea. So you know what I did? I grabbed like 4 of them and clipped my beaner into it. The odds are maybe one of them is the new rope.
oh my goodness, that is crazy. I can't even imagine that happening. I know that my husband had something like, we live in the mountains, my husband and I, and when he was younger, he went to go climb a cliff, and there were some old ropes, and luckily he was only 50 feet from the ground, but he's like, I'm never doing this again, I'll die.
Well, the ultraviolet light in the sun will cause these ropes to degrade within a couple of months. So that's the reason that new ropes are put up every year. That, to your point, that if you're rappelling down a rope that's been in the sun, under snow, exposed for a year, the strength of that rope is probably 10% of the original strength. And if you load it, with a 150, 200-pound body, especially if it's a jerk, it's going to break, and it's not going to stop your fall. And it's likely could kill you. So it truly is a very serious safety issue.
My other question is, and again, this is another controversial one, the overcrowding.
Mm-hmm.
How much do you think that impacts the number of injuries and deaths on Mount Everest and the mountains in general?
Well, so it's typically not the number of people, but it's the weather that kills people and the altitude. So let's take 2 case studies. Last year in 2022 was it was close to the same number of permits that were done this year, of 487, whatever it was, 478, 47. And so, but last year it was unprecedented. In fact, almost the entire month of May that was suitable for a summit push. Now, there were certain days that were worse than others, but in general, and a weather day, a summit day is defined as the winds on the summit will not gust higher than 30 miles per hour. So if you can get up to the South Pole and you've got a 24-hour window where they're going to be below that 30 threshold, that's good to go. And there was close to 20, 25 days of that last year. And so we saw, whatever it was, 600 people summit, and there were very few reports of long lines or queues anywhere on the mountain. Yeah, it probably happened a couple of times at the Hillary Slope, and a couple of other the traditional bottleneck spots, but certainly not compared to 2019. When that year, instead of having 25 days, we had 3 days. And there were probably 25% less climbers in 2019 than there were in 2022, much less this year. So why did those lines develop? Well, 3 factors. One, you had unqualified guides that did not have the skills or the knowledge or the courage to turn their client around who was going too slow. It's like the old man on the 1-lane road driving 20 miles an hour, and you got 50 cars behind you, and the old goat won't pull over. Same thing going up between the South Summit and the summit. It's a single lane road, 1 rope. And if you've got somebody in the front that's going so slow and their guide won't turn them around, shame on both of them. So you had unqualified guides and you had inexperienced clients that should have never gotten themselves to that point. Now, why did they all get there? Was because there were only 3 summit days when the winds were low enough. So everybody rushed at the same time. So it wasn't the crowding, it was the number of days that were available. Mount Everest, and just like Denali, just like Aconcagua, these are huge, huge mountains, and they can accommodate hundreds upon hundreds of people, even on the same day. Now, when I summited in 2011, 200 people summited that day. I never once stood in line, not for 1 second. So it's a big mountain. It can accommodate the crowds, but so it's not the number of people, it's the expertise of the people and the qualifications of the guides. Those are the 2 root causes for what we see most of the problems related today.
That's good to know, because I think there is a not necessarily misconception, but a lot of people hear it's overcrowding. It's like, no, wait a second. There are other factors. And that's just kind of like a blanket excuse, kind of like with climate change, right? Oh, it's climate change.
Right.
No, it's a variety of factors. So
Right.
The same thing with overcrowding. Alan, I have one more question for you because we kind of need to wrap this up. Tell us about your company, your consulting company.
Yeah, Summit Coach. I started it back in 2017 as a way to give back. I kind of view my life has been in 3 sections. Alan 1.0 was that workaholic. Alan 2.0, I just fell in love with climbing and spent 25 years doing it. Pretty much, I'm not going to go back and do any more 8,000 meter mountains now. I'm kind of through with that. And now I'm at the phase of my life where I'm trying to give back. And so I'm in the process of trying to write a book about Alzheimer's and also my climb of K2. I started a Summit Coach as a way of helping people that to sift through all the information that is out there. It is overwhelming. It's bewildering. It's confusing. You go to everybody's website and they all look the same. They all claim they've got the best Sherpas and they got the best food. And, so now you're looking, what's the difference between $50,000 Everest climb and $125,000 climb? And, and sadly, some of the operators are absolutely impeccable. They have a reputation second to none, like an Adrian Bollinger, for example, who you mentioned earlier, or a Lucas Frutenbach or a Garrett Madison. And then you have others, which I'm not going to name, that I wouldn't trust, to take my boxer puppy out, Marley. I wouldn't send Marley out with them. That they're just unqualified and they're all in it for the money. So I try to help people match, first off, to go with their expectations set of here's what to expect when you get to the mountain, camp by camp. Here's what it takes to train. So being prepared is not just a physical training, but it's also the emotional training. It's about understanding what your why, what your purpose is, because it's too easy to turn around on one of these mountains than to keep going. And so, but sometimes you're supposed to turn around, other times you're supposed to keep going, but you have to know why you're doing what you're doing. And I spend a lot of time with my clients talking about that aspect of what their journey is. And, and then there's the right gear at the right price. As the saying goes, there's no bad weather, there's only bad gear. So, and then choosing the operator that you want to go with. And, and to be perfectly clear, sometimes going with a $30,000 operator is 100% fine. And it's appropriate for you if you have the right skills and experience and other things. Other people, they need to go with the $75,000 operator because they need that extra help, that extra support. And so that's what I try to do, is help people figure out what's the best match for them. I don't get any kickbacks from anybody, from gear companies, from guides, from airlines, from governments. The only compensation I get is I consider it a very modest fee, consulting fee, to help people do this. And right now I've got 25 concurrent clients.
Oh, wow.
And they're all in multiple phases, from trying to climb a Colorado 14er to doing the 7 summits. I just had a client, Jen Drummond, who just completed the second 7 summits. And so she's the first female to do the second 7 summits. Had 3 people summit Everest this year. I've got some people over in Pakistan right now. So just, it's a lot of fun. Thoroughly enjoy it. And it's part of the giving back.
Well, and I'm glad that there's someone out there like you that can help people navigate this system, because when you look at some of these Facebook groups for Everest and all of that, people are like, well, where do I start?
Yeah.
And you helping them filter, well, if you have this much experience, if you have this much, this is the best way for you. That is such a unique service, but I think it's something that people aren't necessarily aware of, and it's very important.
I've had clients from age 18 to 79. And the 18-year-old, I love him to death. He's a YouTube sensation, and he contacted me last December. He wanted to go climb Everest in 4 months. He had 0 experience. And I, just said, hey, with all due respect, you're not ready, and you can go. And I promise you, there are companies out there that will take you, and they'll take your money, but you will, one of 3 things has happened. And you may summit, you may die, but I promise you, it's not going to be a pleasant experience. And so we've been working. He went down to Ecuador. He climbed. He just got off of Denali. He's going to go to Aconcagua, and then he's going to go to Everest next year, and he's going to be absolutely fully prepared. And now maybe he won't summit, because I both know that there's many reasons why people don't summit these big mountains.
Right.
But I promise you, he will go prepared, and he will have a positive experience. And that's really my goal for my clients.
That again, that's a fantastic service that I wish more people were aware of it, and because they need that awareness. Talking with some of the people this year, several of them were, that this was their first time on Mount Everest. People that had climbed previously and haven't summited, they could have really used a service like this that helped them navigate all of this stuff. Last but not least, Alan, where can we find you on social media and online?
Probably the easiest thing is just alanarnette.com. AlanArnette.com. And there I've got links to all the social media, to my Summit Coach services and everything else. So that's kind of the landing page. And then you can go to all the usual suspects of Twitter and Facebook. And I'm even on Threads now. I'm not sure how Threads are going to go, but hey, I want to be one of the cool kids. So I joined Threads, but I'm not on TikTok. So sorry.
There you go. Alan, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, and I hope to have you again next year, either during the Everest season or after, to kind of just give us some feedback about what happened.
All right, Mama Bear. I appreciate the opportunity. It was fun talking with you.
Thank you so much, Alan.
Thank you, everybody, for listening to this episode of the All About Everest podcast. I hope you enjoyed this interview with Alan as much as I enjoyed doing it. It was a great time and a fantastic interview. Alan just has so much information when it comes to Mount Everest, and he's very honest and open and compelling and frank when he talks about the Himalayas, especially about Mount Everest. My biggest takeaway from my interview with him, and again, I'm a huge fan of his, is why he says memories are everything. I don't think until now I realized why he says it. And so his explanation of why he says it and why memories are everything kind of hit home for me. My mom has dementia, not Alzheimer's, but it's been a while since she gets that it's me. And I talk to her through my podcast. She listens to it. She loves it. She has no idea that I am the one who's talking, that it's her own daughter. So I identify with Ellen when it comes to that, and a parent losing their memories and their ability to recognize you. I still have no idea who's going to be on next week's episode. I have a couple interviews tentatively scheduled. One of them was rescheduled due to medical issues. Another one was rescheduled due to a conflict. So there's 2 people that I might have for next Wednesday. And if they don't come on, I'm sure I can come up with something. So until next time, climb your own climb. Thank you for listening to today's episode of the All About Everest podcast. We would love it if you would rate, subscribe, and follow wherever you listen to your podcast. You can find us on social media at All About Everest Podcast or at Mama Bear Outdoors. You can support our podcast by subscribing to our Patreon or by buying us a coffee. Until next time.